Hello, welcome everyone. So sorry about the glitch. There was a downloading issue, completely my issue, but thank you for your patience. We are on our second parent chat of 2024, and so we're glad that you're taking the time to be here with us. We have a fantastic guest tonight to talk to us about parenting the teenage brain. As we know, the teenage brain is wired just a little bit differently than ours and been definitely different than our toddlers. So we've got a lot to learn. If you have kids who are younger, don't worry, you're still in the right place. The information we're going to be going over tonight is still relevant. And for some of the stuff, you're just getting a head start and you're going to be prepared when those brain changes start to kick in. So I would love to welcome Jennifer Kennett on the screen, and we will get started. She has a fantastic presentation for us. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, nice to see you.
Thanks for being here with us tonight. So I'm gonna just have you briefly, if you don't mind, kind of give your background. I could read, an opening, but let's just chat about what your journey is, or how you've gotten here, and what you're presenting tonight.
Definitely. So I have been a counselor for over 25 years now, and got my training in Canada and then moved to the US it's about 18 years ago, and started my private practice 11 years ago. It's been a while. And at that time, I had two teenagers at home. It took me a while to open my practice, in part because I had to get a green card and do all the things. But I focused on my practice on teens to start with, because that was a passion of mine, and that was who I had at home, and so it felt like a really good place to focus my energy. And this particular presentation came out of some training I did on emotional intelligence, and really learning more about how teens show up in the world, and felt like it was a good place to be sharing with other parents and helping them understand that a lot of what's going on for our teenagers, it does make sense when you understand the science. It may not
All
be
right.
easy to live with, but it makes sense.
Yes.
Since that time, I've actually, in the last few years, I've pivoted to working more with couples. And actually, since the beginning of the pandemic, I have been working on my doctoral dissertation. So I am about 2 months out from being called Dr. Kennett, which is
Exciting.
extremely exciting for me. Yeah.
So we're
My
particularly
kids,
grateful you're here because you're a little bit busy these days.
my kids think I'm crazy. I keep going back to school, and they're like, "Are you ever going to stop?" I'm like, "Maybe." Luckily now I get to teach, so I get to go back
Yeah.
to school and not have to pay for it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I mean, I love that you're here, and I've seen this presentation a lot. You and I have worked together over the years, and I thought, you know
Sure.
what, we need to go back to some of the basics so that we can support our kids in a different way. The pandemic did do some rewiring of brains, as we know, but the
Mhm.
basics are still true and are still accurate for our kids. But because of all this stuff they're going through, I think now more than ever, we need to go back to the basics, understand what we're working with so that we can be better parents and more calm and understanding parents. So
Sure.
lovely that you're here. You have some slides you're going to share with us. So I'm going to be kind of quiet tonight, but I will be chiming in for those of you who are here with us. If you have questions, Jennifer loves questions. So put those in the Q&A box, not the chat box. You can find that usually, depending on your device, it's at the bottom of the screen. That keeps it in a separate spot for us so we don't lose it in the chat box. And the chat box, we might ask you some questions, but also that's like if you just have comments, it's great to share, not just to host and panelists, unless you want to be anonymous, but so that it's kind of like you're chatting along, hence the name chat box. So, all right, Jennifer, take it away, and I'll be here if you need me.
Excellent. All right. So we'll start with a big, bright teenage brain. Um, I got a few objectives for this session. We're going to talk a little bit about how emotion and cognition are both necessary to a normal brain functioning. We're going to talk a little bit about the brain structure in a really fun way. I promise you will not forget what the structures of the brain are based on the demonstration I'm going to give. We're also going to talk about what happens in the brain during fight or flight. And I'll try and pull in some of what's been going on for our teens with the pandemic in that context. Talk a bit about how the adolescent brain is different from an adult brain, and explore what we can do to support our teens managing their stress more effectively to really support that brain development. This is one of my favorite quotes. All emotion is a request for an action. It really gives context to what emotions are there for. They are a way to kind of move us forward, and they're communicating that our body wants us to do something. It's also important to note that emotions are hardwired and they're necessary to facilitate learning. Therefore, our feelings are central to our understanding of our world. Although we do tend to label feelings as good or bad, each emotion provides information, regardless of how difficult it may be to experience it. And therefore, it's really appropriate to give emotions the respect they deserve as an integral component of knowledge. More importantly, emotions are puffy, and that's actually an acronym that stands for emotions are primal, which means they're hardwired and they're necessary for our survival. They're universal. All humans experience emotion, regardless of their cultural context. So how we express emotion is culturally based, but the experience of having emotions is a universal human experience. Emotions are also functional. They provide crucial information about our interactions with the world, and they're infectious, meaning that when we see somebody else experiencing a particular emotion, it tends to evoke a similar emotion within us. I want you to think about a time that you were maybe not in a great mood and you're walking down the street and somebody smiles at you. You almost immediately smile back and it lifts your mood. So it's important that we recognize that how we experience emotions also influences others. So I'm going to go into a little bit about the brain. I promise that there's no exam at the end of this. You don't have to remember any of this. It's just trying to understand a model of the brain. So the triune brain model talks about 3 pieces. That's what triune means. And a lot of people talk about the brain being like a computer, but that's actually not a great analogy. The brain is more like a swamp, because unlike a computer, the brain is nonlinear. It's influenced by other brains, and it has far more circuits. If anybody is super techie and goes into sort of quantum computing, that might be a little bit more like what we're talking about. But it's still an interesting sort of analogy, because there are sort of circuits in our brain that are made from nerve cells. And actually, your hand is a really great model of this. If think about the neural cells, they kind of almost connect. Sorry, you can't see my finger there. And the gaps in between the fingers are called synapses. And every brain has a lot. No one can count them all, but the estimates range from 10 to the power of 14, that's 10 with 14 zeros, to 10 to the power of 800 zeros. So there's a lot of connections. A funny thing, Einstein was asked, how fast does your brain work? And he says, I don't know, but I guess it's pretty fast. It is also important to understand that although we talk about the triune brain model, it's not as if we were to cut into a brain and we'd see 3 specific pieces. It's just a way of understanding how it's organized. So there are 3 parts of the brain that have different functions. The first is the brainstem, and that contains the autonomic nervous system that controls things like respiration and reproduction and our heart beating. These aren't things that we can actually consciously control. We can slow our heart rate down, but we can't stop our heart. So it's important that's kind of running in the background. That's our operating system in a sense. The limbic brain is often called the emotional brain, and it has the centers for emotion. It also has the centers for attention and memory. Excuse me. And it's one thing that's important to know about this part of the brain is it is 80,000 times faster than the thinking brain, or the cortex, which is the outer part. If you've ever seen pictures or in fact photos of a brain, they look very wrinkly. That wrinkly part is known as the cerebral cortex, and that's the thinking brain. It's responsible for synthesis and analysis, things like logic and math and sequencing and language and music, all kinds of higher order thinking. This is the part of the brain that allows us to be creative and have planning and executive function, which I know we talk about a lot with teenagers these days, but it's an important part of the brain as well. So I'm going to teach the brain now using a bagel, a goldfish cracker, 2 almonds, and a gummy bear. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to provide a demonstration. And like I said, I promised that this would be memorable, and I hope it is. So,
well, and if anybody has those ingredients, go run and get them, and you can do this along with Jennifer.
definitely.
But definitely teach your kids this. Teach them this way because it'll make a lot of sense to them.
I just realized I have one more piece of, oh, where did it go? It is. I'm going to have a purple thinking brain. All right. So to start off, this is the brain stem. So if you actually have seen, if you ever see a picture, it kind of looks like it's got a long piece which goes into your spinal cord, and then there's sort of a lumpy bit at the very bottom. On top of that goes what's known as the limbic ring. And it, as you can see, I'm trying to make sure you can actually see this. It has a bit of a bite out the front of it. I think I'm going to stop sharing, or stop with the video background because it makes it hard. So blur that and turn off the background so that, oops. There we go. So hopefully this will be slightly easier to see. So bagel. And this is the emotional brain. And it actually does look kind of like a ring. If you were to cut open the brain, it looks a little bit like this. The 2 almonds represent something called the amygdala. And amygdala actually is Greek for almond shaped. And they go on, oops, either side of the bagel, kind of like little mouse ears.
Jennifer, if you put that in front of your body, I think it'll be, there you go, it's steadier that way. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see if I can do this. There we go. Now the almonds are the emotional centers. So if you ever have heard of the term fight or flight, what happens is we have a flood of chemicals. Those come from the amygdala. And so that's an important thing to know as well. Oops. To scroll down, I realize I need more hands. This would be great if I was, what is it? The 8. If I was an octopus, this would be much easier to do. So the main job of the almonds is to make sure that the emotions that we need to survive are functioning effectively. The next thing we have is our lovely little gummy bear. He's known affectionately as the air traffic controller, and he's going to kind of sit just at the front of the bagel, and that is known as the thalamus. The gummy bear, the thalamus, is the driver's seat. It's the air traffic controller watching and monitoring, and its main job is to monitor sensory inputs and look out for danger. So it's got 2 jobs. And then the last thing is the goldfish. And the goldfish tend to swim around, right? Well, the hippocampus is looking for things to pay attention to. And what it's most interested in are 2 things: contrast and emotion. So a simple example, what do you remember better? Something you care about or something you don't? The hippocampus responds to any strong emotion. You may have vivid memories of scary or angry times or really happy times. So that kind of fits deep in the emotional ring. So now you have all the basic parts of the emotional brain. The next thing you have is some lovely tissue paper. Mine is purple. And the tissue paper kind of wraps all around the emotional brain, like that. So when it's all functioning together, yeah, my brain looks a little bit different than this. It's probably more gray pink than purple, but that was what I had. So that is the thinking part of the brain. If you really wanted to be accurate, you'd actually make 4 sections of the tissue and you'd pour a bunch of water on it, but that would be a huge amount of mess. I'm not going to do that. But the cerebral cortex is about 80% water. So this is what a brain looks like generally when it's functioning well. What I want to talk about next is what happens during what's known as emotional hijacking, or fight or flight. I'm going to Inside, you've got that hippocampus, the goldfish, and it's swimming around looking for things to pay attention to. And as soon as the hippocampus pays attention to something, it evokes emotion. It sends a message to the thalamus, that air traffic controller, to pay attention. Normally, the air traffic controller goes, okay, we're going to send some information to our thinking part of the brain, and that interprets the information. So, great example, your phone rings. That information, auditory information, comes into the brain. The hippocampus goes, woo, pay attention, sends it a signal to the thalamus, and the thalamus goes, I need to route this information to a couple of different places, the auditory center, and probably to our body to pick up the phone. Now, I think it used to be this, and I think the younger kids do this now. But the bottom line is that it's kind of making sure everything's going well. Now, if the hippocampus sees something that is contrast or is dangerous, it will send a message to the thalamus, and the thalamus will behave slightly differently. Remember I said that the emotional brain was 80,000 times faster than the thinking brain? Well, what the thalamus does is it says, we got to go in red alert. And it actually sends a chemical message through those amygdala, and it cuts off the thinking brain. Sorry, my brain's falling apart here. It disconnects the thinking brain from the emotional brain. And all of a sudden, you are under the control of your emotional brain, and you cannot, not that you don't want to, but you cannot think. So this is why if you get into a fight with your spouse and you're trying to work something out, it's very, very difficult to do because your thinking brain is not there if you're in a highly emotional state. Interestingly enough, a mismatch between words and expression is also perceived as dangerous. So somebody who's like, I'm fine, that tends to, in our brain, the thalamus goes, I don't trust that. That's dangerous. And so it starts the process of disconnecting that thinking brain. So the threat response is part of what Dr. Daniel Goleman describes as hijacking the amygdala. So it basically is saying, you know what? We don't want that part of the brain that's slow. And obviously, from a survival perspective, that makes sense. If you're being chased by, I don't know, a saber-toothed tiger, you don't want to think about what you're going to do next. You want to just act. And so you're wanting just that very, very fast part of the brain. But it's important to remember, our brain gets cut off. So it takes 6 seconds for the thalamus, the air traffic controller, to send that message through the amygdala to the brain to cut off the thinking part. 6 seconds, that's it. And it can take up to 30 minutes for the thinking brain to come back online. Some of you may have seen the model of the hand where you've got the emotional brain inside and the thinking brain wraps around it and you flip your lid. That's another way to describe this. So the bagel brain is a fun one to do. It's also important to recognize that there's certain places we can intervene in this process. The hardest place to intervene is after the chemical cascade has happened. The easiest is before you ever get into fight or flight. So we're going to kind of talk about that a bit. So how does this information apply to our teenagers? I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. So as I said, when our the fight, flight, or freeze response the thinking brain gets cut off. And this is a very complex version of this. We talk about if you've ever heard of the polyvagal theory, which is what this is describing, it talks about there's different parts of the brain that impact where you're going up into fight or flight or freeze, which is the point at which you can't fight or fight any longer. And then go back to what's known as ventral vagal, which is that calm state. So there are 3 points at which you can intervene with this fight or flight response. There's choice point 1, which is during preparation. Preparation is the state that you're in a general circumstance. And oops, sorry. A good example of that is if you are, let's say you're going to a movie and you are wanting, you wanted to go to this movie for a while. It's a really scary movie. And you're walking home after this movie. You've spent the last hour and a half being scared. You wanted to be scared, but you've been scared. So your body is in kind of an aroused state already. That's part of the preparation. And so you're walking along, and out of a darkened alley, something jumps at you. If you've ever been through this experience, you are freaked right out. Your heart races, you might scream, and you're definitely in fight or flight. The likelihood of you being able to calm down is very, very low. So although it is a choice point, it's a hard choice point because your preparation state has primed you for that fight or flight response. I want you to imagine the same sequence, except that you've been at a comedy movie. So you've been laughing for the last hour and a half. Same thing, you're walking home, it's dark, something jumps out at you. You're still going to have that reaction of startlement and a bit of fight or flight. But because you've been in a calmer state or in a more connected state, you're laughing, you've been enjoying yourself, the likelihood is you can come back and recognize that was just a cat that jumped out of the alley. It wasn't actually something scary, and you're likely to laugh. So that's that first choice point 1 is the point at which you have the reaction, but the interpretation changes based on your preparation. The
Jennifer,
third choice point. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt for a second. So choice point, to me, that's resonating as you have a choice to do this or that. But that doesn't seem right.
It is and it isn't.
Okay.
So it depends. Depending on your preparation state, your capacity to make a choice is different. So if you're already in a hyper aroused state on a chronic level, it is very hard to recognize a trigger as a trigger. But if you are maintaining good self-care, recognizing your triggers is much easier. This is why we talk about self-care being so important. The second point, the interpretation, again, is it's that moment. Can you intervene? And this is where, I'm going to go back to spouses, but this could be with your teen as well. If you're having a disagreement and you're both getting escalated, the choice to walk away and take a break, that's that choice point of, we're not getting anywhere. I need to calm down. And then the third point is, it's escalated. Can I self-soothe in that moment? So that's what I'm meaning by those choice points. But they're difficult. The easiest point to make choices at is if you've been working in that preparation stage to stay in a regulated, healthy place.
Yeah, this reminds me of like the window of tolerance. And if your window of tolerance gets really small, if you're super stressed out and you're not taking care of yourself, so your teenager walks in the room, gives you attitude, boom, the choice is your emotional brain just takes over. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And in fact, all of these different theories and explanations do kind of fit together that way.
Yeah.
So the teenage brain. Um, it's important to know that I love this. This what were you thinking? And you see the upside down van with skis on having gotten put into the tree. So the teenage brain versus the adult brain. What I described is applies to every brain, but it's important to recognize that the teenage brain is still under construction. So um, teens develop abstract reasoning, the ability to think about themselves in the third person around ages 12 to 14. And unfortunately, brain development doesn't happen smoothly. So you kind of get these fits and starts. And this is often what happens between 12 and 14. Kids feel like everybody's watching them because all of a sudden they're aware that they can think about themselves in the third person and everybody else can be thinking about them, but they don't have the discernment to recognize that people aren't actually thinking about them. Just because they can doesn't mean they do. So they start, there's a short period of time where teens actually can feel kind of like they're paranoid, like everybody, hates me or does, everybody is out to get me. That's because their abstract reasoning is coming online, but the rest of their brain isn't working so well. The other thing to know is that the limbic system, the part that's involved in emotional processing and reward processing, is highly aroused from ages, baby to about age 4. Between ages 4 and 10, that system really calms down. So you don't have the spikes and the sort of the terrible twos or those stressful periods where you have with a small child from about age 4 to 10. At about 11, that hormonal activity in the limbic system, that emotional brain, skyrockets up to adult levels. That's important to know. The limbic system is responsible for that emotional roller coaster and the storms of adolescence that most people associate with the teen years. The thinking done well under the influence of the limbic system is called emotional hijacking or hot cognition. So think about it. We've got a brain that all of a sudden is at adult emotional levels, but the thinking part of the brain isn't really online yet. You've got the limbic system is also hypersensitive to rewarding feelings of risk-taking compared to adults. So the reason that teenagers take risks is because it feels good in their brain, because their emotional brain is in control. The part that stops us from taking risks is still developing. And what I like to say is, for a while, as a parent, you are your teenager's brakes. And that's a really hard role to take on. You remember that relationship between the air traffic controller and the amygdala, those almonds? Adult brains use the thinking brain, particularly to interpret information coming in before the emotion gets involved. The teenagers use the amygdala to interpret emotional information rather than the thinking brain. So teenagers are using emotions to think, whereas we are trying to use thinking to think, and the emotions kind of come in after the fact. So there's some speculation as to this is why teenagers have some difficulty modulating their emotional responses. If you think about the teenager who comes in and they're just like, everything's terrible, and you're just, whoa, what happened? There is a tornado that just showed up in my house. That's because their emotional brain is what's controlling their thinking and their interpreting of information. Interestingly, in one study, when compared to adults, teens were able to correctly identify a facial expression as fear only about 50% of the time, compared to adults who correctly identified that emotional expression as fear 100% of the time. So they are not reading our emotions, their friends' emotions accurately. They have about a 50% success rate. So if your kid comes home and says, my best friend hates me, that may be their real interpretation of what's going on, because they're not as good at reading body language of other kids. particularly their friends. So let's go on to the thinking brain, that wrinkly part. That's the CEO of the brain. It's responsible for planning, for strategizing, judgment. In adults, it acts as the brakes. It doesn't mature until about early 20s. And this is where there's some gender differences. Boys tend to develop a little later than girls do, by a couple of years. And there's more and more evidence that any kind of neurodivergence is making this process longer. So if we think about most of us think of 18-year-olds as quote adults, or at least the legal system definitely does. And yet really the brain has not gotten to fully developed adult state until about age 25. So it's important to recognize that we're talking about a system that is kind of not connected in the way that the adult brain is. So the ups and the downs, the intensity of emotion that teenagers are feeling is based in what their brain does. It's also true that during the teen period, there's something that is going on called pruning. So there's a lot of synapses in a teenager's brain. And you'd kind of think, well, lots of synapses is a good thing, isn't it? But actually, the brain consolidates learning by pruning away some of the things that are not as important, and making connections that to increase efficiency. So the excess of synapses in the adolescent mind, they can't easily keep track of multiple thoughts and can't gain instant access to critical memories and emotions that allow adults to make good decisions. So our brains have been kind of strategically organized, where the teenage brain is pretty chaotic still. And as that pruning happens, they start to get more rational, and that integration with the thinking brain gets better as well. So the teenagers have faster brains, and they're probably in some ways smarter, but they don't have the judgment and the wisdom that adults do. And that's why teens, as much as they don't want to admit it, they do need their parents for that support.
Jennifer, can I interject with a question?
Absolutely.
Right. So someone's asking, is the limbic surge from hormones in teens due to procreation of the species or something else?
Wow, that's a great question.
That's a deep question.
It is a deep question. I would say that there's definitely going to be an interaction, because the hormones that are the emotional hormones that are ramping up to adult levels are happening at the same time as the puberty hormones, the ones that will help with functionally reproduction of the species. I don't think that that is the sole purpose for it, but it's certainly going to be part of it. Yeah, that we could go into an entirely different conversation around teens and their judgment around sex. I'm not going to go there, but it's a great question, and one that probably Amy Lang would have something to say about as well.
I love that question. And just a reminder, if you have questions, pop those in the Q&A so we don't lose them, and we'll make sure we get to them. But we love questions. So, if you think of anything, no matter how big or small, put it in there and we'll do our best.
So there's the question comes out, well, why should you care about all of this? And I think it's important that we recognize how our brains work so that we can function at optimal levels, because we're going to be supporting our teens through something known as co-regulation. Co-regulation is about connection, and it's about helping our teens manage those ups and downs a little more efficiently. But the only way we can be effective co-regulators is if we are taking care of ourselves and not getting into our own fight or flight, flipping our lid, losing our cerebral cortex to that emotional brain. So it is important that you build resilience, and that's where self-care is so important. It means getting enough sleep. It means good nutrition. It means taking some downtime and saying no. It also is important to understand how the brain works because it increases your choices for how you can respond. If you know in that moment, wow, I think I flipped my lid. I need to take care of me so that I can come back to this later and be more empathetic and more able to connect with my child. That's important for you to know. If we don't know that that's how our brain works, we tend to get ourselves into some pretty sticky situations. I think another thing that's really valuable is it's important that you recognize that the power of language is going to impact how our teens are going to respond to us. That if we are able to say things in gentle ways, and I don't mean being just wishy-washy, but being very clear and direct and using I statements, our teens are less likely to get activated as well. So if the example of if you say to your teenager, you didn't do your chore, their first reaction is to get their back up and be like, so what? Versus a more positive or gentle way to say it is, hey, I'm feeling a little frustrated. I've asked you to do your chore 3 or 4 times in the last few days, and I'm noticing it's not done. I'd really like for you to prioritize doing that in the next couple hours, or even in the next 10 minutes. But it's about that language is going to keep them in a more calm state as well. So yeah, choosing our words wisely is a really important thing when it comes to engaging with a brain that has a more sensitive mechanism to get stuck in emotions. It's really important for us to practice our own good health habits. It's also important for us to be modeling that and encouraging that in our teens. Their good health habits are going to help their resilience. Obviously, I've got teaching your parents about the reaction cycle. Teaching your teen about the reaction cycle is an important thing to do. It's also really, really important to help your teen make choices. Give them opportunities to make choices and experience the consequences. Most of us want our to limit the consequences of poor choices. We want to protect them. But if we think about how the brain works, if you don't allow your teen to make the choice, those neural connections don't get made. Me telling you don't do that does nothing to the brain development. You going through that, or even actually sitting with your teen and saying, what do you think might happen if you made that choice? That starts building those neural connections. So it's really, really valuable to provide those opportunities for choices and consequences while those consequences are low cost. That's why it's valuable to be able to say, well, try that, or what do you think is going to happen? And sometimes as a parent, you kind of have to sit on your hands and bite your tongue, but it also communicates to your teen, I trust you're capable of making these decisions. Obviously, there's judgment attached to what kinds of decisions you can let them make and what kinds they shouldn't. But the more we take choice and decision making away from our teens, actually, the more disservice we're doing to their brain development.
I think one thing that's really key in that, what you just said, is that if we are constantly the ones that are regulating them, but saying no, 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 then they rely on that as, well, I'm just going to push the limits until my parents say no. So I think it's really good to be like, okay, this one I'm going to let you kind of try it out. So when you do step in and say, no, that's not going to happen, there's not as much pushback.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also really important to recognize that we need to time the discussion of challenging topics to when both you and your teen are calm. it's your thinking brain is not accessible if you or your teen is highly emotional. Remember I said that emotions are infectious? Having a teen come in at us hot and staying calm in the face of that is really hard. So if something has happened that you do want to talk to your teen about, making sure you are in a calm state and that your teen is generally in a calm state is really important. This is why I think having conversations while you're driving with your teen works great. First of all, you're not looking at each other, which helps them keep themselves regulated. And it tends to be a fairly non-activating environment. You know, driving, there's not a lot people can do, so they're captive audience, but it's a chance to really talk about what's going on. It's also really, really important to empathize that the emotions that your teens are having are valid emotions. They are not overreacting. Even if they are reacting in a way that you would not react, they are feeling the feelings that are running through their system, and being able to say, I can see this is really, this is really impacting you. This is, you're really angry, you're really hurt, you're really sad, you're whatever it is, but just communicating, I see the feelings you're having, and I validate that they're there, is a potentially very powerful thing to do.
Are you open to a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so someone's asking, since a teen's brain is still developing and has a tendency to make less ideal choices, how can adults help with the decision-making process, given that teens have a natural tendency to rebel?
So I'm going to come, there's a bunch of layers to that. I actually don't think teens have a natural tendency to rebel. They have a drive for autonomy. They want to have the opportunity to make choices. And what feels like rebellion is often, I'm feeling so restricted in my choices that I'm simply gonna stop listening. So my first piece of advice would be, start offering more choices. But the other thing is I'm going to tell a fun story about my own kid, and she knows that I tell this story, so I have permission. When my older daughter was maybe 14, she came to me with what I thought was a completely outlandish plan to go with a couple of friends to downtown Seattle on the bus. And my gut clenched. I was like, oh, this sounds like a really bad idea. But rather than simply saying, no, I'm not going to let you do that, I said, okay, walk me through what your plan is. And I had fully expected that she was going to have a sketchy plan at best, and that was going to be my out. And instead, she really surprised me. She had planned it out. She knew the routes on the bus. She knew, she had phone numbers for people that if she couldn't get in touch with me, she had all the details planned. And I kind of went, oh, now how do I say no? But it was, when I asked her about it, I said, well, what prompted you to have all these, this planned out? And she said, Mom, you've been asking me every time I want to do something, well, how would you go about doing that since I was 6? So I hadn't realized, but I'd been training her to think about what are the steps. And I think as a parent, that's something we can do. If a kid comes to us and has an idea that you kind of like, oh, I don't know, ask that question. Walk me through how that would work. And rather than looking for reasons to just say no or shoot them down, kind of keep digging, because again, the more you ask those questions, the more they're developing that executive function. And you can then say, hey, if there's the point where they're really, either they've made a leap in their thinking, or they really haven't thought it through, it's an opportunity to say, well, here's my concern, which is a very different message than, no, you can't. It's, here's my concern. I care about you, and I want you to think about the possible consequences of this. So I think that's a really, really valuable skill to be working on. And if anyone here has got a newly minted teen, start today.
Yes.
Um, start asking, and it can be even little things like, they've got an assignment and they're like, oh, I don't know what to do. Okay, well, what's the first thing you need to do? How might you get started? Well, I don't know. That's if hearing I don't know is actually a great opportunity to say, would you be open to some ideas? Not I'm going to come in hot and tell them how to do it,
Mhm.
but would you be open to some ideas? And that permission can be really wonderful. And they'll be like, sure. Well, you could start this way, or you could maybe start this way. It's communicating again. I believe you can do this. I'm here to coach you if you need that coaching.
Well, and this, what you just kind of described, even though what you described with your daughter was in a calm moment, if your teen does something outrageous, they get in trouble at school, they get caught cheating or whatever, take a moment to regulate yourself. And if you come in and you ask that question, what is your plan? Or what are you
Yeah.
going to do about this? It takes away that emotion and it allows them to collaborate with you and to talk with you about it instead of, I didn't mean to do it. It didn't, all of that stuff that we often get from our teens if we come in like, why did you do this? Yeah. So I love the very clear, concise way you're saying to do this. What do you think you're going to do about that, or what are your first steps? Very
Yeah.
good advice.
And if you are talking to a teen who's facing the consequence of a bad decision, my advice is start with empathy and say, wow, sounds like you just, you're going through a rough time right now. I really can imagine that you're feeling a lot of stuff. You're starting from the heart and you're communicating, I care about you. I want to relate to you before we start problem solving, before we start, again, remember, if they're in that emotional state where they flip their lid, coming in and saying, well, what are you going to do, might not yet be something they're capable of doing. So check in with their emotions. If they're calm, you can have that conversation. But if they seem activated or overwhelmed, work on the emotional side and really connect on that emotional side.
Excellent.
Any other questions coming up?
Are we done through slides?
We are done
Okay.
through slides.
Excellent. Okay. So we are right on time. This is good. We've got a couple more minutes if anybody has questions. Again, whatever questions come up, big or small, we are here to answer. Where can I find it? We will get you, somebody's asking about the recording. That'll be sent out via email. When you registered, we got your email. That'll be sent out so everybody can access it there. And yes, this recording will be added into our YouTube library also. Any ideas on what to do about Snapchat addictions? Maybe tell us a little bit more about addictions. There's addictions versus using it more than mom and dad want. A little bit of a difference there. So if you can give us some more info. But Jennifer, go ahead and answer as best you can.
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. We are all pretty attached to our smartphones these days. I always say, when I was working with a lot of teens and parents would say, well, I want them to take a break from their phone. And I'd say, okay, who in the family is willing to do that with them? Because your teen is going to have a much easier time seeing you struggle with as well. And the likelihood of all of us being able to simply put down our phone and walk away from it for a few days, very low likelihood.
Let's ask this question, Jennifer. Do the
Sure.
reaction like raised hand. Tell me if your phone is within 5 feet of you. Because I think all of us are probably, yeah, I'll put my hand up there.
Yep.
Mine's right here. Yep. All right, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt. I thought it would be important for us to think about that as parents.
Well, and the reason for that is that these devices, mine's sitting here as well, are built to be addictive.
Yeah.
There's some great videos out there that talk about this. But our teens' brains are particularly susceptible. Remember that emotional brain? That what happens when we scroll through social media, or we're checking our phone for messages, is we get a tiny hit of dopamine, and dopamine is a pleasure hormone every time we see something new. And so that scrolling is a part of that. And teens' brains, because they're focused on that emotional side, are more susceptible. What can you do about it? I would say the place to start is to communicate from a place of compassion and using those I statements. Hey, honey, I've noticed that when we're sitting together, I'm often noticing that it seems like you're distracted. And I really would like to have some time where the two of us are connecting without your phone in between us. I'm willing to put down my phone for a while. I'd like you to put down your phone for a while. The likelihood of a teen being the least bit interested in saying yes, if we are not willing to practice what we preach, is very low. They are they have radar for hypocrisy in parenting. So I think that's an important piece for sure.
Okay, let's see. Oh boy. Okay, we've got a few here. We'll fit them in quickly here. What if your teen is not a planner and has no idea how to plan with friends? How do you get them to think about what to think about ahead of coming to us for how to execute the plan?
That's a place where I would say really important to start doing that coaching as often as possible. So it might be little things like, hey, you want to come to the grocery store with me? You get in the car. How do we get there? Walk me through it. Have them rehearse what it means to think through a plan. It if they have ideas that they want to do something, say, all right, I recognize you want to do this thing. What will make me feel safe is to know that you have a plan, and I'm happy to help coach you through that plan so we can develop it together. But I'm not going to say yes until we have that plan in place. So, and it's amazing how hard it is to actually break down things into a plan. If I were to ask somebody, tell me off the top of your head how to bake a cake. If you're an effective baker, great. But if you're not an effective baker, you're going to be sitting there going, well, I know you've had these sorts of things, and those, it takes practice. And so practice with your teen, and tell them why you're doing it. Say, I want you to become a better planner because it's a very useful life skill. I'm not saying you're bad at it. I'm saying you're learning how to do it. So I'd like to help you do that.
Well, and I think also that, especially as our kids are transitioning from littles to, middle school or so, we tend to do all the planning for them. So as young as you can start allowing them to help out, that's great. But when they start hitting middle school, stop doing so much of the planning for them. If they want to have a friend over, like you're saying, Jennifer, hand it over to them. What's the first thing you need to do? You need to call or text. Okay, what's the next thing we need to do? We need to ask their parents. We need to schedule the ride, all of those things, but bring them into the mix as much as you can. And even if you're having a hard time, because some people want to do all the details, bring them along for the ride, so to speak. Like as you're planning, have them along with you making the decisions. That can help.
Yeah. For sure.
Okay, next one. Can you speak to teen boundary setting that includes no contact with a parent as a way to return to a window of tolerance? So it sounds like kind of like a parental timeout for oneself, I think. Can you speak to that? I'll read that again. Can you speak to teen boundary setting that includes no contact with a parent as a way to return to a window of tolerance?
So I'm going to take a slightly unique tack on this. We are doing a good job as a society of talking about how to set boundaries. We are doing a terrible job talking about how to receive boundaries. And I think that what I'm understanding there is, if a teen says, I don't want to talk to you right now, that sort of no contact, how do we receive it? And what, is there a benefit to that? Yes, there's a benefit. Imposing that on our teen is another way of we're taking away choice. So saying, I'm not going to talk to you as a parent to a teen, that actually affects the attachment, and it connects to a part of us, or the part of the teen, that can be very scary. When we have an infant, our infant is dependent on us for their very survival. So saying I'm going to leave activates that attachment fear of being abandoned. So it's okay to say, I need a break. I want to come, talk to you about this when we're both calm. That's saying I'm going to leave and then come back. But I'm not going to talk to you, or giving a teenager the silent treatment is dangerous. It can be emotionally wounding. Now, teen is going to at times give us the silent treatment. It doesn't feel good. And we have to be willing to self-soothe in those moments and recognize my teenager is dealing with, they flip their lid, they're in fight or flight. The choice that they're making right now isn't about me. That's hard. That's really hard. So
I know
I don't know if
some.
that answers the question, but
No, that's good. Some families actually have like a sign like that they let their teen do, like I'm flipping, so they don't have to use any words to express it, to basically say I can't talk right now, because there are times when you're holding your emotions in so tightly and one word can crack it, and you just like are out of control. So sometimes your teen recognizes that they're way outside the window of tolerance and they need that moment. So yes. Okay. All right. Let's see, we're 8:02, so let's take two quick ones if you're okay with that, Jennifer.
yeah, I see something about talking to teens about things like missed assignments, how to handle plans for the weekend, and work back schedules for schoolwork.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna share a somewhat unpopular position here. We need to let our kids make choices that involve failure. And I think there is a difference between a kid who's just basically saying, I'm out, I'm not doing any schoolwork. But missing assignment, there is an element of being able to hand that to them and say, this is your education, not mine. And I really want to support you. I want to be your mentor in any way I can, but I cannot be your manager on this one. And then when they do inevitably deal with the emotional consequences and the logistical consequences, be empathetic. Yeah, that it really sucks that you're getting a D in that class. I can imagine you're feeling pretty upset, maybe even ashamed. What can I do to support you? Is there anything I can do to help you get back on track? And I mean, there have been times, again, with my own kids where my daughter came to me and she was really upset because she failed an assignment. And my question to her was, did you try your best? She said, yeah. I said, did you learn something? Yeah. I said, okay, then the D is the D. It doesn't say anything about who you are as a person. It simply says that was a hard, piece of information that you were trying to learn, and you have learned from it, and you will continue to learn from it. But my job isn't to punish you for doing something that helped you learn. So
Awesome, and that's really hard to do, but it's what has to be done, especially if we're thinking long term. They need to be able to handle those consequences if they go to college or if they're at a job or when we're not there co-regulating with them. Okay,
yep.
Last question for tonight. Any suggestions if my child always goes to bed at 12 to 1 a.m.? And you're not alone on this question, by the way. There's a lot of people who are dealing with it, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the things is that the teen brain is hardwired to sleep in and stay up later. I don't know why. It probably has to do with hormones again. And I think I get curious about what is it that it is benefiting them about that. I know that seems like an odd question, but we can go into all of the things about this is a bad idea. But if we don't take the time to check in and go, what is it about being up until 1 a.m. that's really appealing to you? It might be that they are just needing some alone time that doesn't have, schoolwork involved. It might be that they've gotten sucked into a video game. And I know that can be a big piece of this. But what's fueling that? What's underneath that? Get really curious about what is it that they are getting out of it, and then talk about, I would ask, once I've said, what are you getting out of it? Okay, what are the things that are not working about this for you? And it could be, well, I like it, but I'm tired in the morning at school. Yeah, okay. So on the one hand, you really want to have this time to yourself. And on the other hand, it's making it really hard for you to stay engaged at school. I want you to succeed. As your parent, I want you to succeed. What do you want?
I like
We
that.
we have to remember, these are adults in training. And if we don't give them opportunities to be adults in training, they're going to be doing that once they're out in college, and they're going to be making much more expensive mistakes than they would when they're 15 and they still live in our house.
So true. Yes. And both of us have girls in their 20s, so it is true. It is true. You got to let them do it while they're at home, while they're in school that's not costing you because of money. But yeah. All right. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Super helpful. This is recorded, so I would recommend watching this again, sharing it with other people, but also share it with your teen. Let them watch it and approach it as like, what do you think about what these girls said, what these ladies said, what they're the experts, right? So kind of not, you need to watch this. You might actually get them to watch a little bit, especially if you bring out the food and do the model along with Jennifer. So, all right, awesome. Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you so much. I appreciate you spending your time with us, Jennifer. It was fun. It was informative. Love spending time with you. If we can give her some reactions, some hand claps and hearts, that would be great. And before you jump off, just put in the chat box something you learned tonight, something you're going to take away from tonight, and go out and make those changes. All right. Good night, everyone. I appreciate you being here. Have a great week.